Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack something, honestly, pretty fascinating. We are looking at the absolute pinnacle of Dr. Avinash Kumar Gupta's Clinical Cognition course. Specifically, we're zeroing in on Lesson 13, which is entirely focused on clinical wisdom and mastery. Now, if you've been following along with the Vibrowns framework, you already know this is a system built heavily on Socratic learning and guided discovery. But today, we aren't just covering the basics anymore. We are looking at the absolute apex of how true experts actually think.
So here's the core dilemma we always face when we watch high-level professionals in action, right? What is the actual difference between an expert's intuition and just a really dangerous shortcut? I mean, when a master clinician looks at a patient and seemingly knows what's wrong in the split second, is it magic or is it something we can actually break down? Well, in this explainer, we're going to frame clinical wisdom not as some mystical, unexplainable force, but as a complex mystery box. And together, we are about to pry that box wide open and reverse engineer exactly how it works.
The whole approach to this framework really boils down to one simple but powerful idea: tracking how clinical reasoning actually moves, not just what conclusion it reaches. See, Dr. Gupta's approach to clinical cognition is all about making the invisible machinery of decision-making completely visible. Sure, it's super easy to celebrate a correct diagnosis, but true mastery? That comes from understanding the actual mechanics of how you arrived at that conclusion in the first place.
Now, before we can talk about mastery, we have to understand the foundation. Section 1, the Clinical Cognition Engine. You simply can't achieve true wisdom without a super reliable engine driving your thought process. Let's move to and see how this builds upon the earlier parts of the course. The first 9 lessons of the Clinical Cognition series are totally dedicated to constructing this exact core cognitive engine. It's a very disciplined loop. First up, pure observation. Second, differential building, which is taking those raw findings and creating a stress-tested, probability-weighted list of possibilities. And third, bias auditing, which is where you turn your critique completely inward. You literally can't skip these steps if you want to be an expert. They are the scaffolding.
But here's where it gets really exciting. Lesson 13, which is our focus today, is the ultimate culmination of the entire course. It takes that core machinery, that highly disciplined loop of observing, building, and auditing, and pushes it way beyond a single diagnosis. It extends that engine into the realm of ultimate mastery, where your reasoning operates at a completely different scale.
Which brings us to Section 2, Capturing Tacit Knowledge. And this introduces the first major challenge outlined in Lesson 13. How do you capture something that the experts themselves might not even realize they're doing?
Well, we call this tacit knowledge. It's the underlying unspoken clinical wisdom and reasoning that usually just stays invisible. This is essentially the locked black box of the expert's brain. It's that gut feeling. When a seasoned clinician says, "I just have a bad feeling about this case," they aren't using magic, right? Their brain is processing dozens of micro-cues based on decades of experience. But they're doing it so incredibly fast that the reasoning stays entirely invisible. Our job, if we actually want to learn from them, is to translate that unspoken wisdom into a visible, understandable trace.
It's basically detective work. Capturing tacit knowledge is all about forcing that invisible reasoning right out into the open. We have to ask the right questions, often relying on those Socratic methods to make the expert pause and say, "Wait, why did I think that?" We take the invisible and we make it visible, turning what looks like an instinctive leap into a fully documented, step-by-step cognitive path.
But, making things visible reveals a pretty uncomfortable truth, which brings us to Section 3, real expertise or a shortcut. Once you crack open the reasoning process, you have to confront this critical duality. You have to ask yourself, am I looking at genuine expertise or just the dangerous illusion of mimicry?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how sharply deep, tested reasoning contrasts against lazy mental habits. Because from the outside, an expert and someone taking a dangerous shortcut might look exactly the same. They both arrive at a rapid conclusion. But under the hood, the engines powering those conclusions couldn't be more different.
Let's actually compare these side by side, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Just look at the origin. Real expertise is born from running that deep cognitive loop thousands of times until it becomes completely fluid. A shortcut? That's just a lazy mental habit. It's pattern matching without real understanding. Next, look at visibility. True expertise can always be traced backwards. If you ask a master to explain their steps, they absolutely can. The shortcut, though, remains a black box. The person just shrugs and says, "I don't know, it just kind of looked like it." And that leads us straight to the final point: safety.
Real expertise is auditable. If something goes wrong, you can find the exact error in the trace. A shortcut might occasionally reach the right conclusion by sheer luck, but because the way the reasoning moves is so flawed and hidden, it is incredibly dangerous. You simply can't fix a process you can't see.
Which perfectly sets up our final mechanical process, Section 4, auditing compressed intuition. If we know for a fact that shortcuts are dangerous, how do true experts protect themselves from falling into those lazy habits? Well, they do it through an ongoing internal audit.
And this brilliantly illustrates the concept, compressed intuition. I absolutely love this phrase from the source text. Think of it kind of like a zip file on your computer. Over years of practice, an expert takes that massive multi-step cognitive loop we talked about earlier and compresses it way down into a split-second judgment. It feels like intuition, but it's really highly compressed data. It's incredibly efficient. But just like a zip file, it can get corrupted over time if you aren't careful.
So the crucial point is this: true experts never just blindly trust their gut. Mastery requires a closing habit. You absolutely must periodically unpack your own intuition, audit the underlying biases, and verify your reasoning trace to ensure you haven't slowly replaced a rigorous cognitive loop with a dangerous shortcut over the years.
True mastery requires auditing your own intuition. I just want to let that truth hang in the air for a second. This is the massive, central philosophy of Lesson 13. It is literally the defining line between someone who is merely experienced and someone who is a true master.
Let's ground this abstract philosophy right back into reality for a second. This quote sits at the very bottom of the course index, and it serves as the absolute baseline safety principle of the entire Vibe-Rounds framework. All outputs require independent clinical verification. No matter how advanced the system is, no matter how incredibly wise the clinician is, the process of verification and auditing never, ever stops. Safety demands it.
We've unpacked a ton today. From Dr. Gupta's framework, we've taken the invisible and made it visible, we've separated true expertise from lazy shortcuts, and we've explored why it is absolutely necessary to unpack your own compressed intuition. So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Look at your own professional habits in whatever field you happen to work in, and ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you audited your own intuition? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the process.